Before we start, just a couple or three announcements. One, Susan Muma about her symposium.
I think I can just speak from this, thank you.
Yeah,
Hi, I just want to give a plug for something that's happening next weekend. When Alex and Margarita were planning their symposium, I was also planning another one, and that's on Jane Jacobs, which will be next Friday and Saturday. The modernity of work. Oh, I have to put my glasses on. Let me do that over again. The modernity of work and place. Jane Jacobs in the design of the 21st century city. Two just very quick things. This is a partnership between the Federal Reserve Bank, the School of Architecture, School of Law, and the City of Charlottesville. We have a great opportunity here to carry on this conversation, this very positive conversation that we've begun today, and also begin to think at a more granular level what we might do in our cities. Just why this architecture school and Jane Jacobs. She received the 1996 Jefferson Medal. Her father went to medical school here. Her son went to school here. And we're claiming this, but Nobel laureate Bob Dylan and Jane Jacobs actually wrote a song that we will be presenting at this. We're saying it was created here, actually. You can say anything you want. The most important thing I want to tell you is we've had this terrific opportunity. Citizen Jane, The Battle for the City, the new documentary, will be shown in Charlottesville for only the second time in the United States. It was shown at, in Quito for Habitat 3, in New York earlier this week, and we've gotten permission to show it here. So information is on our website. We would welcome all of you to come and celebrate Jane Jacobs' 100th birthday. Thank you. She won't be here, though. In spirit. In spirit.
The second announcement is that, as a reminder, in fact, is that outside on the East Gallery you have the Catalyst tree, and it's free, so you take it and take it home, so and care about it and read it. So, so yeah, it's take the opportunity. So it's a nice book publication. And the third one is that Nick has agreed on giving a second lecture on Monday as an extension of the symposium, and before just he takes the plane. That's Monday from 11 to noon here at the same place, and it's about large-scale agriculture. He will just explain a little bit about it. Nick, if you can, yeah, picture.
Okay, I have to do some publicity, so all come over because it's nice to have an audience. I studied at the Agricultural University as a landscape architect, and so I was always related to agriculture. Then I worked in the Ministry of Agriculture, but I have some historic interests, and I noticed that as being very modernistic, our school in Wageningen, we didn't learn much about the history of our profession, how it came about. We knew that it was very related to modern agriculture as it developed after the Second World War in the Netherlands, because the profession was installed then. But I was very curious, so I started searching information, and I came into some interesting things about the root of my profession, because we always learned that our professors went to America and they learned all kind of Anglo-Saxon thing and so on, but then I noticed that before those years in the 60s, we had lots of contacts with the Germans. And so there is a strange mixture of German influence and English-American influence in our profession, in our country, and also American influence and some German influence in the development of modern agriculture, or so-called modern intensive agriculture. And I combined that and searching, I did some interesting findings, so I wanted to share them with you. And maybe the two things that are central in the story is about the coming about of organic agriculture versus inorganic, as I call it, agriculture, and what have landscape architects to do with it this spring. So come all over if you have time.
Thank you. Okay, those were the 3 announcements we wanted to do before we move into the last table conversation. So escape that or where's the house? All right. So that's a risky table, let's say, because of course you're not, you have, oops, swap. So the idea here is to provoke or ask a series of questions, or maybe ask you to play the game of interpreting some invented words or concepts that I'm going to throw here to see how do you see them from your point of view or from your field of expertise, from your expertise as architects, expertise as landscape architects, as scientists and professors of law. How do you contribute to I know it's not a very comfortable thing to do because, of course, going out of your field of expertise is always risky, and we are here in front of the audience. But we have been talking a lot about very sophisticated ideas about society, about citizenship, about ownership sometimes, about the importance of the project as catalyst of transformation, what is culturally for us nature, what is this construct, and can we invent another way of looking at the environment. So here is the first one. So if acting as a naive person, as usual, almost like a child using a non-existing word, I'm asking if until today we have been, or in the past we have been articulating this construct, which is the citizenship with rights and duties. Many authors like Henri Lefebvre, Le Droit de la Ville, or others in the past, this construct has helped us to write laws and organize our societies. And I wonder if there is any, giving the right to if there is any possibility of moving, or even if it's helpful to imagine something like planets and sheep, something that defines rights and duties even it's true that we haven't achieved yet citizenship for everyone, and if we can go beyond that and imagine something like that, just as a first question. Maybe the microphone.
I guess that falls to me. No, really, sincerely. I think the phrase one often hears, that one wants to be a global citizen, is a little bit of a conceit, and means less than it suggests. Because I think the really distinctive and important thing about citizenship is twofold. One is that you're actually involved, as I said before, in collective binding decisions that give a shape to the circumstances of a shared life. We, of course, as we all know, don't have anything resembling that kind of decision architecture on the global level. So there's nothing to be a citizen of, in the sense that a citizen is not someone who is just in relation to a space, but rather in relation to an artificial political community that can make decisions and deploy law and power. And I don't think that's just formalistic. I think it's actually the real material reality that gives citizenship its significance in this political sense. Now, I do think a person might be a part of a global civil society, for example, a global professional network, a global republic of letters. And those are excellent things, but their significance is much diminished if all of the collective choices that are actually giving the world its shape are happening within these smaller territorial boundaries of nation states. Skepticism is the first note, and I think for the second reason too, that when we talk about being global citizens, we're mostly talking about being connected with people who are like us and whom we like all over the world. Citizenship, in its hard and real sense, locks us in with people we don't like and don't know how to talk to and may be scared of. And I think everyone on both sides of the political divide in the US has been well aware of that recently. So planetary citizenship would be hard and scary for a lot of people, which doesn't mean that it wouldn't be something worth trying to have.
I always like the person who speaks within the rules we have to go first, so that I can then decide which ones I can ignore. But I really needed that reminder that citizenship has boundaries and rules and obligations that go along with it, in the literal sense of the word. And you gave us some history about that. I think of myself as someone who is tied to landscape in all kinds of ways, as dependent on the earth for my daily function. And not only that, but that because I have agency of some sort, if I choose to make bad decisions about that landscape and the place that sustains me, I take down a lot of other species with me, in addition to potentially other people. And so I think from a moral perspective, I'm guided by a sense that while I am, in my case, a Canadian citizen, I think that my country's taking of resources at a greater rate than others is a wrong. And so my obligation, maybe, is to the planet's finite resources, and not only services, but life-sustaining capacity before even my citizenship. But because I am a citizen of a country that allows me to critique its government, I can use my agency to say that what my citizenship affords me is critique, and what they're doing to certain resources. And for example, let's just use mining just for 1 second. Canada's a mining empire and touches mining on every continent of the planet. It's the world's largest resource mining empire. Pretty small number of people relative to the planet's space. So for me, that's an obvious conundrum, or it's a wicked problem. So maybe I need to think about my planetary belonging and my obligations to that landscape that sustains all of us first.
I have two comments. One is from a human species standpoint, which is the first one. I agree on both comments that were made in terms of that there is a role for citizenship within the boundaries. There is a role for citizenship outside the boundaries. I wanted to provide an example. In the US, you can be only American citizen. Other countries allow to have people to have multiple citizenships, so that I'm Italian, I'm American, my child is Vietnamese, and he's American. We are both American, and the moment we're American, we are not anymore Italian or Vietnamese. But if, according to the Italian government and the Vietnamese government, we can be both. What I wanted to mention, so there are different ways of experiencing the boundary I'm not a lawyer, but I do, and I don't have that expertise, but what I want to say is I think there are different levels of responsibility here that are at play. There are some, for example, agreements that are global, and as a part of that, I'd like to be able to be felt responsible for those global, and thinking about, the global agreement about carbon emissions or global biodiversity and other things that, as a country, we have agreed to be part of. And so my citizenship at that point is expanded. I want to also make the case for the other species. We need to start to give citizenship to other species. Because if we want them to live in our cities or in other countries, they have also their rights. And there are some countries too who actually recognize legally their citizenship and their rights.
Now, I could give an example of in France, for example, at before the big French country, there is all the region, all the area was producing everything. For example, in Bordeaux, where there is the wine, they were producing wine, but also butter or some other things. And then in Normandy, this is more on the north of France, they were producing butter and cheese and also wine. But at one moment they understand that, because the climate of Normandy was very wet, there is a lot of rain, it's cold, so it was very difficult to produce wine there. The wine was, you need a lot of people to take a lot of time to produce wine, and you don't receive a lot of quantity of wine. And so they, at the end of the 19th century, they start to say, okay, in Normandy we will produce only butter, and wine will be only in Bordeaux. And so they start to locate some product according to the climate. And I think it's what could happen in the future. So it means, maybe we need some cold, like we heard about the data farm, all the data farm today where there is a Google computer, they are in California, and they have to use a lot of air conditioning to cool all the computers that heat. And so they start to bring them in Alaska or in some colder country where they don't need energy to cool this computer. So it creates some new location for that, because it's quite absurd to have this computer in California where it's already very hot. So I could imagine that in the future, we could organize a little the things according to the climate. And I think it should be, like you said before, I think it was really strong. Today we are at the planetary scale, and the nation are something that are linked to 19th century. And I don't think that in the future this could continue like that, because this is something, this is completely artificially forced today.
So because I'm going to sound really curmudgeonly, I want to be clear at the beginning that I think one of the things we most need in the world politically is movements that are strongly internationalist around values like human equality, global distribution, and global environmental responsibility. And I think we need those structurally because of the fact that our economic and ecological world-making activity is at a scale that's out of true with our political decision-making. Last time that was true in the last Gilded Age, in the last age of globalization in the late 19th and early 20th century, many radicalisms were internationalist rather than national, and we should be for the same reasons. So I say that as a kind of letting you know where I stand, because I first think that the content, even of the kind of global citizenship that you're talking about, it's only what you say in Marie, and I think it goes as far as, and this is very important, being able to mobilize against our own governments to try to get them to do things and to try to get our co-citizens to see things internationally, because the Conference of the Parties that comes out of Paris has all the legal power of a promise to come to dinner next Sunday. Well, if you're going to be a nice person, you'll do it, but if you don't do it, no one is going to come and make you do it. It doesn't bind any of the countries, and there's no power in the US to bind any other. Now I'm going to sound even worse, because I think that giving animals citizenship is a conceptual mistake. And that doesn't mean that I don't think we should have strong rights for the protection of the well-being and the habitat of other species. I don't think it means that we shouldn't attempt to engage in serious, imaginative deliberation about what the experience and interests of other species might be and how those could be accommodated within the structure of law. But I think that, again, I must seem very dogmatic about this, but I think the thing about citizenship is that you're able to participate in decisions that can be authoritative for and bind everyone who's in the decision. And there's one medium to do that, and that medium is shared language. There's a lot that we can do that doesn't require language, with space, with sound, with touch, with feeling, absolutely. But not political decisions ultimately. So I think we can only have shared citizenship where we have the possibility of shared conceptual communication. And I think all the cases where countries constitutionalize or otherwise legalize what they call the citizenship of species or ecosystems or whatever, what they're doing when you come down to it, and I think it's a fine thing to do, is empowering advocacy groups with one or another ecological vision to bring lawsuits in the name of the entities that they value. And those ecological groups always disagree with other political groups or other philosophical schools about what the interest of the ecosystem is or what ought to be done with it and so on. And unlike with rights that people have, the ecosystem or the species will never tell you what it wants to have done. So in that sense, it's not a sphere of autonomy that's being protected for it. It's a decision that the people make about how we're going to value it. And I just don't think we can jump over that linguistic gap. So that's me. I'll stop now.
Maybe I'm wrong, but is it so that citizenship and rights are directly connected?
No.
I think
No.
you can have rights for animals without being
Absolutely.
making them citizens.
Absolutely. But you can't have rights as the form that the animal will tell you what it wants to have done with its ecosystem.
No, because they are in another domain.
Yes.
They are in another domain, but still you can communicate. So it's not.
Well,
So your decision.
You can communicate a lot, but I don't think you can communicate a parliamentary
No, I agree.
process.
I'm wondering if on this continent also you have this movement of rightful materials, because that's very interesting in sustainability. In the sustainability case, we have people now that are translating the right of humans, the Universal Declaration of Rights for Humans, to the Universal Declaration for Rights of Materials. So in Canada, with this mining, carbon really has rights. I have the right to not be mined, or they have the right to not be mined, or materials have the right to not be mixed up with other materials or with other organic things. I found it very disturbing first, but then afterwards when I start thinking about it, when you are giving rights to materials, it helps a lot in thinking about sustainability, about flows, about processes. And
I think it's a fine moral metaphor. It's a fine moral metaphor. It's a nice way of specifying that you think there are some boundaries in what we ought to do with the materials, just like we use rights to say there are boundaries in what you can do to other people. And the materials can't consent to your doing something different.
Consent maybe because they react now, so.
No. The oil can't consent.
You can't. Okay, but maybe consent is not a word in the Netherlands. We in our neighborhood, we use the system of consent when you're discussing, which is different than consensus or parliamentary. Yes, so when you have consent, you have nothing in contrast to the opinion of the other. So if the material or the animal doesn't react, it means that it doesn't have nothing in counter, no?
I just wanted to add a little. I'm sure there are a lot of other questions that we should move to, but I just want to make two comments. One is to say I totally agree that we don't know what animals want, and that is a very important point. We interpret, and unfortunately, we actually don't do only with other species, but we do with our fellow citizens who are not the same ability. They're invisible people, and actually we do with our children who are don't have the power to express themselves in the parliament or through the vote. So I think, again, this is an important metaphor for understanding the role of rights, and they starting to make us reflect on our responsibility towards our fellow citizens and to the globe.
So, for example, in the Convention on Global Biodiversity, some countries have enshrined intrinsic worth values to other species that are non-monetized. They can quickly become monetized because immediately when you ascribe rights to something, other creature, you then set up a hierarchy of valuation by the people who are ascribing or bestowing those rights, which I think is part of the conundrum, Jed, that you spoke about not being a wise idea to extend citizenship in the way you defined it. Is that correct to say? So to our discussion, maybe what we can influence in this room with the various types of expertise and knowledge, we might then think about inverting, as Marina just suggested, and I think Jed laid the groundwork for, inverting that responsibility. It comes back to us. If we can establish shared values, or even areas of divergence and difference that we can agree to talk about with compassion and with a calm breath, right? Then we get a shared language, and then we get a kind of legibility for a framework that says, how do we take responsibility? Particularly for those of us who have more agency than others. Do we then have more responsibility on our agenda? Or do we then have to be much more careful about how we negotiate with those who have less? And that seems to me to be one of the biggest differences we struggle with at the moment. Is it going this way? It's going this way.
To me, the word compassion was very important. So citizenship, when refugees come to our country, citizens or not citizens, it doesn't import to me. I can feel compassion. Like I can feel compassion with a hurt dog or a dying mushroom. And I start to learn about to have compassion for a stone in the neighborhood or material that's lying around and be confused and so on. So this compassion thing, I think, is something very typical for people or humans, and sometimes it's forgotten. So, and it's something of a relation, how a relation is. When there is some relation, you can start to feel compassion or not. Another thing is this citizenship, because there's a formalized world which is totally different from this compassion. So people that don't share any values with me still, most of the people have this possibility to feel this compassion, and it has to. It's easier to have compassion for a person and for other apes than for a water flea, or for, at least for me, because they look more like me, so it's easier to reflect on what it is to be another ape.
Let's move to the next toy. So no, just before moving, in fact, to the other toy, I think it has maybe misunderstood the idea of planetzenship as a global citizen. I think it's different. What I meant is the condition that is driven in rights and duties in regards to the planet. So the rights and duties in relation to the resources and the equity and all the challenges we have in front. Let's move to another that is about ships all the time. So ownership, that here Sichao has been before asking as well, and other of you have been commenting. What about ownership moving into usership? Do you see that transitioning in a fertile way, or not?
I have a question of clarification. Do you really mean usership, or do you mean something more like stewardship?
No, I mean the fact that ownership is related to the property of a piece of land and the stability of that piece of land over time. I just wonder if the rights of a owner can be less perennial and be evolving over time in a sort of new entity called usership.
Thanks. So, I have a procedural question, which is whether for the next word we throw out, maybe we shouldn't see whether anyone in the audience wants to shout out things and reply, even with this one. Also, if I might quickly, it's one of the reasons it can be so delightfully head-turning to come over to a school that's not my usual school is that in law world, people literally say, oh, Purdy, he's that animist poet person who's somehow teaching in law schools. And then I come over here and I feel like Dr. Spock or, so these are just so many subcultures in this funny world. So I think that property as actually lived in life and law is evolving and involves responsibilities that change over time. Owners' responsibilities change radically when the Endangered Species Act actually puts a non-monetary value on biodiversity. They change with zoning laws. They change when the Clean Water Act recognizes the obligation to preserve hydrologic systems. So I think in some ways, the reality is ahead of the cultural myth. The cultural myth is of a kind of tyranny of one person over one resource forever. And the reality is of an evolving and in some ways actually a very significantly improving acknowledgement of interdependence and responsibilities actually coming with being the person who gets to make decisions for a piece of land.
Just a quick, just a quick comment. I really liked what you said this morning about this. The idea is not so much about who owns what, but actually, again, the word responsibility comes back. Because if ownership becomes also responsibility, it's also responsibility to maintain the functions of that piece of land for the functions that it has for its own land, but also for the planet.
I think, are there some questions here that we want to engage?
I just have a comment. My comment about the usership, transition from ownership to usership is, if we're referencing political divisions in this country, it would seem to me that attaching responsibilities to land ownership and making land ownership anything less than absolute right to do what you want with the land is really a flashpoint already. And just like I think Jedediah referenced the land refuge in Oregon and how that was a wonderful example of the two paradigms of land ownership, whether the land really belonged to someone who could use it for human
the highest and best good being, highest and best use being what humans want to do with it, versus the highest and best use being just to admire it the way it was created. So it seems to me if you're talking about creating a new concept, then that's going to be a really hard sell in our current political environment. Thank
you. Maybe about usership and ownership, I think the ecological way of thinking say that we are only usership, we are not ownership, because everything is like inside a cycle, so we know that our own part of the body will go somewhere else, and everything is like molecules that go somewhere, and so I think I have a very funny story or a strange story to tell about that. But when I have a daughter, during 6 months she was drinking only milk, like we buy some powder to create the milk, and she grew with that, and she become big with that. And I was really thinking that his molecule, was produced by this firm that was producing this milk. You could understand, because this is really the milk, that there's product that give form to her, to grow. And so it's quite strange if you buy Nestle milk, you have a kind of Nestle molecule baby, or So I don't know if you understand the story, but it's mean this. This is a reality of what's happened. It's come from the milk, it becomes someone, and then it goes somewhere else.
I think that's because you're nature, and as a natural person, you consist of inorganic and organic stuff, and all these things are just passing by in the universe. So this is, in this moment, you're just one typical formation of information of all these stuff. Another comparison, maybe other people have read that, was Michael Pollan about grass, American lawn, but also about mice. It was very funny. It's the same thing you say about your daughter. He said that we are thinking that we are dominating the grass species, but in reality, for instance, the mice is conquering all the world and has some evolutionary techniques to use us as carriers of their evolutionary development. Because the mice was in Southern America, the Spaniards came, and the Aztecs knew about how to cultivate the mice. At least they thought they knew it, but the mice used them as cultivators. So then the mice spread all over the world, and nowadays almost 70% of our carbon inside is of mice origin, because you cultivate a lot of mice, you send it all over the world as animal feed. We eat these animal products, the beef and the milk, and so if you trace the molecules inside of us, it's all mice. And so the really important species in the world that it's organizing the world system is the mice, and the carbon it's producing. Maybe it makes you laugh, but it turns the perspective. Who is ruling, the beekeeper or the bee? So the bee is domesticating the beekeeper to make a world around the bee so he can survive. I think it's useful sometimes, like you did, to turn around the perspective, because we think we are primordial species and dominating, but if you do this twist, then you can learn more about your role in cosmos and in the world, I think.
2 questions. One is where we can apply for citizenship with the mice. And the other, slightly more serious, is whether the mice are capable of this act of imaginative inversion as well. That seems significant. Next.
Oh, good. Oh, wow.
Yes.
So that's a really hard act to follow, because I was going to be a little more serious, but I think I shouldn't say that actually, because I very much think the way you just described that. So
somehow I wanted to get back to the term usership, because for me that's still too limited. Because when we think of usership, and I'm thinking of it now within the context of instrumentalization, exploitation, what it means to use something, we do that very well right now, unfortunately. And maybe there's another term. I mean, there's a big difference between caring for something and exploiting something. And use somehow ties back into this notion of exploitation, domestication, and still comes back to the notion of private property. I also wanted to come back maybe to the first question and to your response, Jedediah, because I kept asking myself, within the context of our ecological urgency, maybe it's the legal instruments and their modes of communication that are becoming obsolete, or the notion of a nation state that is obsolete, and that we need new instruments. The example that I had was, I was thinking back to, I was on a panel, or moderating a panel that was part of the Architecture League of New York series, and this was a panel that was on water, or a day that was on water, and I was dealing with the Great Lakes, and of course, you know, there's that wonderful border that runs right through the middle of the Great Lakes between Canada and the United States. And of course, that border, as a line on a map, and what it is as a kind of legal instrument, is seemingly meaningless in relation to the material flows that are happening, the ecological flows, the way pollutants move in both the air above and the water below, right? And the fact that we still think in terms of this notion of the border as the legal instrument, as being the dominant one, to me is part of the problem. And it's part of how we got to where we are now ecologically. And I actually think that that's the challenge, is for us to rethink what our instruments are and our modes of communication.
It's okay. I have lots of things I could say, but I'll keep it quick. I just wanted to go back to the idea of putting the data farm in Alaska or someplace cold. I think there's a really big difference between cultivating grapes or producing butter in climate appropriate areas and locating a fossil fuel derived heat producing thing in a place that's going to be colder, but that energy is still coming out. The energy has still come out of the ground and is being transformed, and putting it in a colder place is just going to have a huge impact on that colder place. I also wanted to second what I was saying about the idea of usership still being, it's basically still objectifying the land, thinking of it just as private property, and I'm not sure that, like, even as Margarita was trying to clarify, the distinction between ownership and usership being thinking of the land as something that you, I would use the word inhabit, but for shorter terms instead of in perpetuity. It may be able to, it might be a better way to approach land ownership, but having just had a conversation about this with a couple of my students who are from China, where land ownership is, and I don't know much about this, but is more like usership, where you basically have a lease for a certain amount of time, whether it's 15 years or 70 years. It depends on how you structure that, but if you don't have, what that can lead to is the fact that the greater powers that be, the government, gets to do whatever they want with that land, and it's not doesn't necessarily translate into a more collective, responsible way of inhabiting the land.
If I can just respond, it is a response really to Isla's comment and also to yours, that we've been struggling with the term in one way or another, usership. For me, it's utilitarian. It immediately suggests extraction, exploitation, and it does not tell us how to use. So there is a good word from a long time ago, that's stewardship. It's fraught too, because it implies caring for in a kind of pejorative way sometimes. So if we thought maybe more about the rules and responsibilities of what careful use looked like. There's a wise use movement too that hasn't done us much good. So maybe we'd be careful how we qualify use. But it's a conversation we have to have, and in particular, when we look at other countries and other places that have very different ideas about ownership. I mean, there are lots of countries that don't have a constitutional, that don't have private property rights enshrined in something like a constitution. Some of us only own land to the depth of the plow. It's an old term. I'm not sure how deep the plow goes these days. It depends on who's driving it. But in Canada, for example, you own the surface of the land because land rights are separate from subsurface mineral rights. So to bring that back, embedded even in that idea of use and ownership, suggests only partial and is silent on how, because what is beneath your feet belongs in some places to a higher authority. But we also have other ways of knowing. We have plenty of models of indigenous knowing that have very different ideas about use that could be very instructive should we choose to listen to them.
There's something quickly to the comment and challenging question about. On one level, I think I'm inclined totally to agree. I think one of the most powerful forms of political argument is to observe that an institution of a certain kind can't solve a problem of a certain sort, and that shows that the institution is basically flawed. And I think it may well be that the territorially delimited nation state is unable to solve the problem of climate change, and that that's just emblematic of other global coordination problems. And if that's true, then we're going to need to think about which dimensions of that institution need to change. I don't think it may not be borders per se, and the reason I say that is simply this, that if you think that someone has to say what the rule is in any particular spot, and that decision-making process is going to have some territoriality, and if it's not perfectly global, then there are always going to have to be borders, then I'm not sure that it's borders per se. I think it's about their scale, their fit to the problems of regions and hemispheres, and the character of the decision processes in them. But certainly there's a lot of dysfunction in the current instantiation we have of nation-state.
Just a very quick one. I just wonder whether the elephant in the room is not the kind of complicated and all-encompassing financial system, multinational financial system that we touch on but never directly talk about. And just taking that mice example in the coin, like, I think this, you can really think in that way that we are just batteries and feeding into a system that's just really separately constituted from any kind of planetary systems, and they have their own separate purposes, and they have their own kind of logic of accumulation and production, and it's producing products, that's becoming architecture, becoming fashion, becoming trends, and becoming chairs, and air conditioning, and so on and so forth. So I think it's just a thought there. I think a lot of people have been argued in this direction. I just wondered whether anybody has a quick response to that provocation.
Someone? No? No.
I think that's the underlying theme, quietly and very big, for sure, in an era of the multinational global corporation that is extra state in its rights, as far as I understand. The culpability is not about responsibility other than responsibility to the bottom line of a shareholder. I'm a planetary shareholder myself. I bet most of you are. I can't really breathe or last more than 2 days without clean water, and certainly can't last more than 7 minutes without clean air. So as part of my shares in the planet, I think my system evaluation is different. And I think a lot of people feel that way. So we have to be very careful when we start thinking about takings, meaning resource takings that are extra state, and ascribing those values to corporations that have more power than governments.
Maybe one thing to say about that tremendously powerful global network of finance and exchange is that it tends to draw all resources into it, to commodify them and monetize them, and ultimately securitize them and make them very abstract economic resources within a single mode of accounting, which is that basically what can be successfully monetized shows up on the quarterly bottom line, and what doesn't does not, and gets tossed off as what the economists call an externality. And this means that however we feel about what really matters in our world, whatever we learn to imagine differently, to see as being alive or confused or conscious or important, ultimately the decisions about what is done with it are very powerfully going to be dragged in the direction of a bottom line that can see some things and not see others. And that is a very intense check on and challenge to idealistic efforts. Ultimately, broken record, but I think the reason to go back to politics is that the market will not of itself develop a new value metric. That has to be imposed on it from outside.
I'm sorry that my partner Jeremy has departed for the day, because he often likes to remind me that in conversations with economists outside the design world in particular, that it's not as though first there was the economy and then there was an ecology to serve it, because that is apparently the world we live in right now. And so we bring this conversation, I hope, right back to the agency of all of us in this room to think across our disciplines and to use a collaborative and creative advocacy for other ways of not only knowing, but accounting.
Thank you. I just had a quick comment about this, because actually it reflects quite well in the issue of accounting and the way we think about natural systems in economics or urban design and planning, often as an external factors that we can build upon. And I would want to reverse also this in ecology and in ecological system also need to challenge the concept of usership. Because you may have heard the word ecosystem services. One way in which ecologists have started to monetize ecosystem services or ecosystem function, the ability of species to produce things that we take advantage of that support our life are basically by considering humans as users. So it's the same frame of mind, framework that builds even within the ecology, even when we're trying to monetize and create a different measurement. I actually have challenged the ecologists and argued that humans are not just users of the environment, but actually are also producers. The moment that in cities we, for example, build drainage that are more sustainable or green infrastructure is a way in which we are producing ecosystem services. So I think that this measure opportunities that we have today to challenge our disciplines to actually achieve a different way of thinking and communicating across fields is an opportunity that even we take now and move into a new way of thinking and generating new data and new research, or we are going to miss for several years the point.
Let's move into the last question and come back to design and to research design and the different categories of design thinking, let's say. And if you see the role of university as midway up to serve the commons. It's, yeah, the university and the midway, so have structures of bottom-up structures of commanding transformations, urban transformations and societal transformations. We also have this line of way of doing a culture that is top-down. I just wonder if the midway can be developed at the university level, in which manner, if that makes sense for you. I wanted to write Midway X, in fact. Midway X, almost like Malcolm X, as a call of a revolution, in fact, within the university realm, as independent critical thinkers, serving the commons and rejecting being as service providers.
Wow. It's a good thing the university exists to give us the space to critique that construct then, seeing as we're all sitting in this room on a Saturday at 6 minutes to 6. We have a number of different disciplines among us, but those of us who are employed by a university are not given the great gift of being here without tenure, because we were good at talking to other people. We were given tenure because we were really good at our disciplines and only our disciplines, and that's what we had to show to stay in the university. So by definition, the structure does not foster that. But fortunately, when you're here without limit of time, and I don't mean tonight, I mean generally in your career, you get to say those things. And so one of the things we've been asking for today, or I've heard all of us ask for, is a non-binary, a non-dual approach to thinking about design, thinking about the implications of ecological science and politics that allow us to cross-pollinate our disciplines. The challenge will be to work in a university structure that recognizes collaboration as intensely as it does individual contribution, and so the metrics have to change. I mean, they are changing to some extent, but that's a big ask, and we have to be the ones asking it.
I totally resonate to what you say about the university playing a role that can't be reduced to return on investment measured in income terms from a degree or from research. I have a very sentimental and traditional, but I think actually also rigorously accurate view of the university as maintaining, helping in a very important part to maintain a kind of cultural commons of ways of seeing, ways of thinking, extraordinary moments of expression and imagination that, like anything else out there in a complex ecology or a complex chemistry, can have all kinds of unanticipated gifts to make down the way, but will never have the chance to do it if they should go extinct. So I think there's a kind of rich commons of human experience and reflection and creation that it's become our role to maintain apart from its profitability, and I do think that that role is under attack in a variety of ways, in different manners within different kinds of university, and the response that one has to make to it is both a sort of left response that we need to be able to imagine very different worlds than the ones we have, and also it's a certain kind of conservative response that we can't let things go just because we don't see the use of them at the moment. It's actually everything other than a neoliberal response to the university's role.
Any last comment from the audience or question? We are about to finish, 3 minutes and be on time. Yeah.
I have only a comment in relation to the last question. I think the university is the ideal place to do exactly what you are requesting, because we are not depending on market efficiency or whatever. We are actually 1/3 of our time as an academic is dedicated to looking for new solutions and to do research, to go out and to be interdisciplinary. So I think the university is the best environment to do this. The curriculum sometimes a little bit too slow. So when we think about that, we are teaching methods that are maybe more for the last model rather than the next model, the next cities that we have to design and think. The question is the curriculum fast enough, or the changes in the curriculum fast enough to actually adapt to this? But other than this, the reason why I'm at the university is because the university gives me the opportunity to do this work.
I agree with that, but I think also one of the qualities should be the slowness. So at least have one place on the earth where things can go slow and not have to adapt in quickness. Quickness is a good thing, but slowness is also something to caress and to give lots of space.
Just to throw in one other perspective related to the university from the student side, and being in the position of taking on $120,000 of debt in order to participate in this. I am in no way free of the economic system or economic pressures.
That's exactly the point that I meant to make. The pressure that you're under is the pressure that the whole institution in consequence is under. I don't at all mean, oh, they're picking on faculty. I mean the whole structure of what we're doing has to be responsive to the situation that you're in this economy of higher education funding.
I was just going to add, I feel I am on the opposite side of the student position because, and when I say the opposite side, the opposite end but the same side, is that I feel the economic pressure every single day because of my own role in relation to the institution. And because we are continually having to justify the work that we're doing in monetary terms, in research funding, in industry partnerships, in tuition funding, et cetera. And it's something that I would say most of the faculty are shielded from on a regular basis, but any administrator knows very well. You know, I had 3 emergency budget meetings this week alone because of the cutting of state funding, you know, while the election results were happening. And that's a reality, and I think, you know, we are continually under attack. So preserving this space of creativity, this space of intellectual freedom is absolutely critical, you know, to our mission.
Okay, let's finish with that. There is some, or one more, okay? We need to go. All right, after party. So let's close this symposium officially or make a pause, because at 8:30 to 10:30 there is a party at Fine Concrete, and there we'll have a projection of the seminar work. It will be also here at the school in the following days. And there are small buses available in front of Calbreth at 8:15.
The first pickup is actually at 7:45.
Okay, that's a good point. So it's a party. It's not a dinner. It's just some refreshments and something light to eat. So you can go home, take a shower, whatever, take a rest, and then come and see the place where material fine concrete is building. So it's a nice warehouse from Alexander Kitchen. So yes, everyone is invited.
And we also will have musical stylings.
Oh yeah, thank you. I'm like tired already. Exactly, we have special music from Elgin selected. Woo! Projections of interesting work of the seminar that have been analyzing projects all over the semester and doing animations, diagrams and cool things to see. And then some food and friendship, so we can continue a conversation there.
Sorry, last interruption. Okay, for the buses, the first pickup will be at 7:45, and then it'll just sort of do a continuous circle until about 8:30, 8:45, and then we'll start doing the same continuous circle back to Campbell Hall.
Exactly, yeah. So you're safe on the bus is a small bus of 30 people. So, okay. Thank you, everyone.